smoothly and naturally. You shouldn't try to speak too fast, because if you talk too fast, it sounds like you're trying to fit an hour presentation into 10 minutes, and it doesn't work, and people won't be able to follow what you're saying, and But on the other hand, you don't want to speak so slowly that everybody just falls asleep. Right? There's an optimum rate of speech that I think most people will find agreeable. And it's easier said than done to speak naturally. If you're up here and you're petrified, then there's only so much you can do to just sort of calm your nerves, and just try to do the best job that you can. I know it's easier said than done. Speak at a moderate rate, as I just mentioned. It also helps to make eye contact with the audience, because if you're always doing this, looking at the slide, then it gives the audience, it gives them a sort of a psychological sense of disconnection between you and them, and it helps to have a rapport with your audience if you face them. And that shouldn't be a problem in a room this size. Sometimes I have to teach 100 students in a big classroom, and it can be a real challenge to maintain eye contact with somebody who's 30 feet away or 50 feet away. But anyway, that's a good thing to do. It also helps for you to avoid distracting mannerisms. Don't scratch yourself. And it's amazing how you might think that you don't have any distracting mannerisms, but and I used to teach. One of the courses that I teach regularly is our introductory electronics course here at ECE 320. And back in the dark ages, we actually used to have a component in that course that required every student to make an oral presentation in class. We don't do that anymore. But so I used to get to see every single undergraduate student at Clemson make a 5-minute presentation. And you would be amazed. People, you would think that they'd be able to do an excellent job, but under the stress of having to stand up in front of your peers, these little idiosyncratic behaviors just come out of nowhere. Like, you might find that you rub your hands together. That's one reason for doing a dry run, because that gives you the chance to do this and to see for yourself whether you say every other word, or so. You start every sentence with the word so, or there's sometimes when people talk and when they're speaking about anything, and all the sentences are declarative, and in spite of the fact that they're not asking any questions, the pitch of the voice goes up toward the end of the sentence. That's called rising intonation, and it tends, lots of people do that, and it can be very, very annoying, and you may do it without even realizing it. All right, so try to avoid distracting mannerisms, and next week when we go through the practice session, you'll be able to see whether or not there are any of those that you need to be concerned about. Also, please don't act like you're anxious at all. Right? That's easier said than done, but you need to give the impression that you're completely at ease, and the more practice you get with this, the easier it will be to do that. This last one is sometimes the most difficult one to deal with, particularly if you don't do this very often. Okay, so I wanted to spend just a few minutes about the anxiety. What can you do? For all I know, maybe all of you are old hands at this, and you're completely at ease, and this is not an issue. But if you're concerned at all about how you can appear comfortable when you're doing this, here are just a few little basic tips. Number one, you'd be surprised. Well, maybe you wouldn't be surprised. Nothing puts me at ease quite as well as knowing the presentation that I'm going to make like the back of my hand. If I know from memory everything I'm going to say, that goes a long way toward calming nerves. It can make you really nervous if you can't remember what you want to talk about and you don't know what order your slides are in. And so, the more you know about your presentation, the more thoroughly you know it, the less nervous you are likely to be. Number two, rehearsing. The more you rehearse, the better you'll get to know your presentation and the less anxious you'll be. Also, get used to the room and equipment. You've been in the room before, but I'm sure that you can come in here and practice. Talk to Dr. Harrell about that, because Dr. Harrell can reserve the room for you. If a group of you want to get together at some point and and go through additional rehearsals, I'm sure that would be possible. Get to know the audience in advance. That's an advantage that you have because you all know each other now. So hopefully you won't be really nervous because you're not talking to a bunch of strangers. And there are relaxation techniques. You know, you can just sort of sit calmly for a few minutes and breathe deeply, try not to hyperventilate, think calming thoughts. I don't mean to make light of this, but you know, I play the piano in another life, and they're back in the days when I used to give formal recitals. In order to avoid having bouts of stage fright, you know, I would just sit there and just kind of take some deep breaths before walking on stage. Another thing that you can do is to think about the presentation. If you're really having trouble with this, try not to think about the fact that anybody's watching you. I mentioned playing the piano. I used to think about, you know, when I walked out on stage, I used to imagine just being in my living room and playing the piano with nobody out there. You know, just pretend that you're actually just talking to yourself. The more experience you get, the easier this will be. Rehearsal, I think, will probably be, for your purposes, for your immediate purposes, probably the most beneficial of all of these. So the more times you run through this, the easier it'll get. Okay, now there may be some questions that are asked following your presentation, and so it would be remiss for me not to talk for a minute or two about this. I mean, answering questions should seem, it may seem like, well, it's obvious how to answer questions, you just answer them. Well, but there's the potential for trouble sometimes. Number one, you should wait for the questioner, wait for the person asking the question to finish. You know, you may be so anxious that you're tempted to jump in. You know, if somebody says, "What would you do if?" and you don't listen to the question, and you spend 5 minutes answering it, and then he said, "What I was going to ask is, what would you do if this, not that?" You know, and that can make you look kind of not professional. So wait for the questioner to finish before answering. On the other hand, some people can ask these really long-winded questions, and you may start wondering, well, is it going to be 10 minutes before he finishes asking his question? So it's certainly appropriate for you to interrupt tactfully, if you can, to avoid somebody from being really long-winded or making a statement rather than asking a question. It also helps for you to think before answering. This can sometimes get you in trouble, and I mentioned, you know, other things that I've done, like playing the piano. Another thing I've done is I've served as an expert witness in patent litigation. And when you're being deposed by an attorney who is asking you questions, it can be, you know, it's really easy to get tripped up. If you say something and you don't say it exactly correctly, then a good attorney will just, you know, latch onto that. You said this, you said what, and then you have to back up and say, well, I didn't really mean to say that, you know. So it helps to think, you know, just spend a few seconds to make sure you understand the question before you answer it. And in this room, this is not so much of an issue, but you might find this to be the case in conferences. If it's in a large auditorium and somebody toward the front asks you a question, then it may be the case that people in the back of the room haven't heard the question, so it can be beneficial for you to repeat the question so that everybody can hear it before you answer it. You haven't asked me any questions yet. Anybody have any questions about any of this? No. Remember, you can, whenever you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Okay, when you're answering questions, try to avoid getting into a lengthy conversation with any one person. And in your case, because of the time limit, 15 minutes, if your presentation is, say, 10 to 12 minutes and you've got a total of 15, I think it will be necessary for you to avoid getting into a lengthy conversation with any one person. Avoid extended answers, and also, by all means, avoid arguments. That probably won't happen in this sort of situation, but sometimes at conferences I've seen situations where some other professor who's doing research in the same area wants to debate a point you're making, and it can look very unprofessional for you to get into a heated argument in front of a room full of your peers. Okay, now, you see, I've talked for 45 minutes about technical presentations, and I haven't even spoken a word about slides yet. you see. So I want to get the point across that you should really think about these exactly what you want to say and how you want to organize it before you start thinking about the slides. But now I need to say something about visual aids or slides.